When I started this channel, one of the first questions I was asked is, how do you build a world? And I've been hesitant, I've been really not wanting to talk about it, but might as well get started. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to the Daily D20, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. If you like what you see on the channel, I invite you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos every day. The simple question of how do you build a world is one of those things that there is no real good way to answer it, which is why I've kind of been avoiding it for so long and not wanting to dive into this topic of building a world as a game master, but I figure it's about time to do that as I'm beginning the process of building my own worlds to use in adventures myself. So we're gonna actually get into this world building a little bit, but this is just the first of many videos covering various topics related to world building. I think one of the things that makes it so difficult to say, here is how you build a world, is because world building in tabletop role-playing games definition is kind of loose. You could consider world building just creating an adventure for your adventure party to go on. It could be creating NPCs that your adventure party will meet. It could be creating towns or cities, or yes, the whole world that your adventure takes place on. It could be creating the campaign. There's a lot of different definitions of what is building a world, but what I'm going to use in terms of this series is the building a world from scratch, meaning a planet of sorts, or something, a place that the adventures will take place on, that will have a history, that will have a defining factor that sets it apart from others, and will be a place where a lot of stories and adventures can actually take place. When I began thinking about world building and what I wanted to make, one of the hardest things to come up with was always, where do I start? And I guess what I ended up discovering, or deciding for myself, is I had to define why I was building this world in the first place. Am I building this world just for use in my own games with the players in our homes, just being friends, or am I trying to build this in order to publish it into a book, into a campaign setting? And I think for most game masters, that's what you need to think about before you start actually building your world, is why are you building this? What is it that you really want to accomplish with building your world? And then that can determine the way you actually start it. If I was just building a world that I'm just going to use in my home games and I don't plan on putting it out in public, I would probably start much differently than how I am going to start, because yes, this thing I plan on publishing in some way or another. Now, even when you define what you want your world to do, in the end, you still have a lot of options of how you're going to start. So I can't tell you definitively how to start building your world, but I can share with you what I'm going to be doing. And for the videos in the coming weeks, I can share with you the work that I'm doing and the steps I'm taking and the information I'm trying to figure out to share, so I can share with you what I do, and then maybe that can give you some ideas on what you can do as well. And for this first week, the information that I chose to go with, I wasn't going to go into any big creation story or anything major about the world just yet. I just wanted to define the world and give it something that would have a little extra history involved, but would still be something that is visible in the world that the players are in. I wanted to name it, and I wanted to come up with a starting location, so if I decided that I wanted to put a player or an adventure party in this world tomorrow, I would have something to start with. So there we would have it. It would be the concept for the world, a name for the world, and just a small starting location. That's what I chose to go with, and then I would be building my world around that. Now that I've talked about all this stuff that I'm going to be doing, let me share with you what I decided about my world. The name is Yndare. I'm going to put it on the screen here because it's hard to pronounce. I came up with it when I was having dinner one day. It came to me and I liked it, so that's what I'm calling it. The concept behind this world is actually something I took from history of D&D. I remember hearing some stories, watching a YouTube video about a race of people that had harnessed magic to such a degree that they could make mountains float, and they would build giant floating cities, and I liked that idea in a world that took place after these giant cities had either fallen from the sky or were still there but maybe were deserted at the time. So in my world, one of the big defining things is that there are these relics of giant floating cities scattered around the world, that some have been floating around, doing things, moving from one place to another. Some may have been anchored, to the ground, others may have collapsed into a heap, and each one of them has something a little different about it that could influence the world that the adventures take place in. With that in mind, I decided that I liked the idea of there being an island that was relatively small, but was also the home of one of these floating cities. So the island itself could have been a mountain that was then cut horizontally, and then that top part was floated up and flipped over to build a giant city above it. So essentially, the picture that I have in my head is an island with a giant city floating right above it that basically casts a shadow over the whole island, which basically creates kind of a double-decker island, we could say. And this giant floating city mountain thing is also anchored to the island with gigantic chains in the 4 directions, north, east, south, and west. And at each of these anchor points, some sort of civilization would have popped up because it is a large landmark that is very well known. And each of these towns could have something a little different to bring to the table in terms of the island's economy. That's where I started, and I did define one of the towns. The East Anchor is more of just a small hamlet that is just kind of the leftovers from everywhere else. But that is the basic start of my new world that I'm creating. I am going to be doing a new backstory on how these mountains became floating. I'm not trying to just take everything Dungeons & Dragons related and put it in my story, but I am stealing a little bit from that old history of the floating cities. Now that's my start. That is what I decided would be my starting point. But for you to create a world, you got to decide what you want to look at first. Some people want to start with a map, some people start with a name, some people start with a whole history of the world that they're living in, and whatever you decide to do, that's fine. That's the step you want to take. In the next week, I am going to be working on maps. I do enjoy maps a lot. I haven't made any maps in a good while, and that's probably going to be my next step, is mapping out the island itself and probably expanding into the nearby continents and the world at large. So stick around next week for that one as we get into building the world of Indare. Yeah, I can't pronounce it the same every time, but that's what we got coming up. Let me know in the comments below what your world name and main concept behind your world would be. I'm interested to know what you would create as well. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button, and of course, as I mentioned before, you're welcome to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you know when I upload new videos. And that, fellow Game Masters, is how I am beginning to build a world. I've been Richard Quiner. Thank you for watching.